Millionaire mother listens to black cleaning lady teaching 9 languages to her autistic son. Her life changes forever. Can you explain why you're speaking to my child? Elizabeth Whitmore's sharp voice echoed through the grand marble foyer of the $35 million estate. At 41, the heiress to a global cosmetics fortune, she carried herself with the practiced coldness of someone used to control. Her eyes narrowed at the sight before her. A black woman in a navy apron, seated cross-legged on the floor beside her 8-year-old autistic son. The woman, Camille Johnson, 36, stood slowly and adjusted the spray bottle on her cleaning cart. She'd been working in that mansion for just under 4 months. Silent, unnoticed, invisible. No one had asked who she used to be. No one cared that she had once taught linguistics at multiple universities before tragedy and debt forced her into jobs that would cover her mother's rising medical bills. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore, I was just—" "You were just what?" Elizabeth interrupted, heels clapping like gavels on the marble. "Ethan hasn't uttered a single word in over 2 years. Not one. And now I find you whispering God knows what into his ear. What are you doing to him?" The boy, Ethan, still sat on the floor, flipping through a brightly colored book. His sea-gray eyes lit up with an alertness Camille had come to recognize. It wasn't detachment. It was brilliance hiding behind misunderstood silence. "He approached me while I was cleaning," Camille said carefully, only half lying. The truth was, over the past several weeks, she'd noticed his subtle reactions when she muttered to herself in different languages during her chores. First German, then Portuguese, and just the day before, he'd looked her in the eye and softly repeated. Elizabeth snatched the book from her son's hands. "Italian. Where did he get this?" "From the reading room, ma'am. I was reorganizing the shelves and—" "And you thought my son would make a nice experiment?" Elizabeth snapped. "He's severely autistic. He doesn't speak. He doesn't engage. He can't learn. That's what 3 of the top neurologists in the country have said." Camille felt the familiar sting in her chest. Not from offense, but from knowing. She'd seen that same lifeless dismissal directed at so many children over the years. Children written off because adults were too blind to see past the label. "With all due respect, Mrs. Whitmore," Camille said, her voice calm, with the kind of quiet strength that only comes from surviving things no one should. "Some kids don't respond because no one's ever spoken their language. The one they understand inside." Elizabeth scoffed. "You're a housekeeper, and you're lecturing me about my son. About a child you've known for a handful of months." "It's not a lecture," Camille said gently. Camille crouched back down beside Ethan and said softly, "It's just about possibilities." And that's when it happened. The boy looked up from the floor, locked eyes with Camille, and whispered a phrase so clear and deliberate it made Elizabeth Whitmore stumble back a step. "Merci, madame." The silence that followed was absolute. Elizabeth blinked once, twice, her expression frozen between disbelief and awe. He just spoke French. Camille gave a quiet nod, her eyes glowing with quiet triumph. "Children like Ethan aren't broken, Mrs. Whitmore. They just speak a different language than we do." Elizabeth looked at her son, then at Camille, then back at Ethan, who now flipped through the Italian picture book with focus and curiosity. For the first time in 2 long years, there was something unmistakable in his eyes. "How did you know?" Elizabeth whispered, her voice stripped of its usual certainty. Camille didn't answer with pride. She offered a small, knowing smile, the kind reserved for people who've carried truths too powerful to share all at once. "Let's just say, I've been on the other side of that silence before. And there, in the hollow elegance of a mansion where wealth could buy everything but insight, a woman most had trained themselves not to see had just planted the first seed of a change no one in that house could have foreseen. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who should have seen your value, then you understand this. The greatest response isn't anger, it's proving them wrong with grace." Subscribe to discover how one woman they called a cleaning lady didn't just help a child speak, but rewrote the rules of an entire family. The next morning, Elizabeth summoned Camille to her private office, a polished room lined with leather chairs, charity gala photos, and framed deals that served as monuments to her curated morality. "Let's get one thing clear," she began without offering Camille a seat. "Whatever happened yesterday, it was a fluke. Ethan makes noises sometimes. That's all it was. It doesn't mean anything. Camille stood silently, hands folded, unmoved. Yes, ma'am. I understand. From now on, I don't want you interacting with him. At all. Zero contact. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. In fact, I think it's best if you confine your work to the lower level and utility areas. The upstairs staff will handle any spaces Ethan frequents. Camille nodded without reaction, though her thoughts burned beneath the surface. If only she knew. If she knew I have a PhD in applied linguistics from Columbia. That I spent over a decade studying language acquisition in neurodivergent children. That I've published 17 peer-reviewed articles in international journals. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, just cleaning. But Elizabeth wasn't finished. And since we're setting boundaries, she said, leaning back in her chair with a condescending smile, I hope you didn't get any illusions from yesterday. Ethan is profoundly autistic. 3 top neurologists in the U.S. have confirmed it. He's not going to improve. He's not going to talk like a normal child. He won't have a normal life. Each word landed like a blade, deliberate and dismissive, but Camille's expression remained calm. Inside, though, she recalled the 43 children she had personally worked with, kids once labeled beyond hope who now attended top universities, spoke multiple languages, and had futures brighter than anyone had predicted. I understand your concern, ma'am. Concern? Elizabeth let out a dry, humorless laugh. This isn't concern. It's reality. And I would prefer that my son not be used as some pet project by someone who isn't qualified. Later that afternoon, while Camille was organizing supply shelves in the basement, she heard footsteps descending the stairs. It was Dr. Alan Kim, the family's longtime pediatrician. He paused near the bottom, glancing around to make sure they were alone. Sorry to intrude, he said quietly. I need a word with you about Ethan. Camille straightened, alert. Is something wrong? Quite the opposite, he said, stepping closer and lowering his voice. Yesterday, when I heard him speak French, that was the first intentional verbal expression we've witnessed in over 2 years. Camille's heart skipped. And, do you think it was a coincidence? Dr. Kim's tone grew more serious. I've been practicing medicine for 2 decades. I can tell when a child is just mimicking sounds and when something is actually reaching them. That wasn't random. Camille hesitated, the weight of a decision pressing down on her. Telling the truth could change everything, or unravel it. She studied Dr. Kim's face, searching for something human, something trustworthy. Doctor, if I told you that I have a PhD in applied linguistics and spent 5 years specializing in cognitive development in children, what would you do with that information? The silence stretched, thick with possibility. Dr. Kim blinked, registering her words. You have a doctorate? Columbia University, Camille replied. My dissertation focused on multilingual learning pathways in neurodivergent children. I've published 17 peer-reviewed studies. Jesus, he murmured, sinking onto a box nearby. What is someone with your background doing? Cleaning houses. Camille inhaled slowly. Life happened. I lost my position after my mother was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. I needed immediate income to cover her care. That was just over a year ago. Dr. Kim shook his head, stunned, processing it all. Then his eyes lifted again. And Ethan, do you believe you can help him? Camille didn't hesitate. I don't believe. I know. He's not severely autistic, at least not in the way he was diagnosed, Camille said carefully. Yes, he exhibits traits on the spectrum, but his core condition is selective mutism paired with high auditory sensitivity. His emotional shutdown is a response to being treated like he's broken. Dr. Kim furrowed his brow. And how can you be so sure? 43 similar cases over the last 5 years, Camille replied without hesitation. Children who were written off with the same prognosis. Today, 38 of them speak multiple languages fluently and are thriving socially, academically, living full lives. Dr. Kim sat silently, absorbing her words. Ethan has an appointment with me tomorrow. Elizabeth wants to increase his dosage again. She says he's retreating into fantasy. He's not retreating, Camille said firmly. He's progressing. For the first time in years, he's beginning to communicate, in a way that aligns with how his brain works. I believe you, Dr. Kim said quietly, then pulled a business card from his coat pocket. This is my direct line. If you're serious about helping him, I'll support your work however I can. Quietly, of course. He handed her the card and left without another word. Camille stood in the still basement, the card in her hand, 1,000 thoughts racing through her mind. For the first time in a long while, something inside her shifted. That night, while Elizabeth dined with friends at the country club, Camille took a bold step she hadn't dared in 2 years. She picked up the phone and dialed an old number. "Professor Bennett? It's Camille Dawson." A long pause followed on the other end. "Camille, where on earth have you been? Your research has been cited in 3 international journals just this month. Harvard's been trying to get in touch with you for half a year." "I'm in a temporary situation," she said, voice calm. "But I need a favor. I need access to my files, especially the intervention protocols for selective mutism." An hour later, Camille ended the call with something she hadn't felt in months: a sense of purpose. Professor Bennett would send the materials discreetly, just as she needed. A personalized language program was already taking shape in her mind. What Camille didn't know, however, was that upstairs, Sandra, the other housekeeper, had overheard fragments of her call, and by morning, that information would reach Elizabeth's ears. Meanwhile, in Ethan's room, the boy lay on his stomach flipping through a worn book he'd discovered under his bed. A picture book filled with animals and their names in 6 different languages, subtly left there by a woman no one thought twice about. "Chat, gato, katza," he whispered softly, each word falling from his lips like a melody. Because sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't start with confrontation. They begin in silence, in whispers exchanged in shadowed corners, in quiet alliances, and in the patience of those who understand that the fiercest storms are always preceded by stillness. The next morning, Sandra knocked on Elizabeth's office door with a look that blended urgency and a trace of vindictive delight. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think there's something you should know about the cleaning lady." Elizabeth looked up from her financial spreadsheets, already annoyed. "What now, Sandra?" "Last night, I overheard her on the phone. She was talking about research, academic research, scientific publications and—" Sandra paused, savoring the moment. "She mentioned something about being a doctor." Elizabeth blinked, her mind suddenly turning. "Dr. Camille?" "Yes, ma'am. And she talked about 40-something cases of children like Ethan. I think she's been pretending, getting close to him under false pretenses." Elizabeth's thoughts raced. A housekeeper who taught languages, who spoke of academic frameworks, who got her son to speak. The puzzle pieces clicked together, and they left a sour taste in her mouth. "Bring her to me. Now." 15 minutes later, Camille entered the office and found Elizabeth standing behind her desk, the glow of a laptop screen illuminating her unreadable expression. Elizabeth commanded, her voice flat. Camille complied, her face composed, showing only the practiced calm of someone who's spent months surviving judgment. "You lied to me," Elizabeth snapped, spinning the laptop around. On the screen, a Columbia University profile displayed Dr. Camille Dawson. Her list of publications, keynote presentations, and international awards too long to count. "I never lied, Mrs. Whitmore," Camille replied evenly. "I simply didn't offer information no one ever asked for." "Didn't offer?" Elizabeth slammed her hand on the desk. "You let me believe you were just a cleaning woman. And all this time, you were a doctor of linguistics with a specialization in neurodivergent children. And why would that have mattered?" Camille asked softly. "You made it clear, from the moment I stepped into this house, that I was meant to be invisible, that my role was to clean and stay silent, that someone like me couldn't possibly have anything worth hearing." Elizabeth felt something unfamiliar rising in her gut. Shame. "That's not the point. You should have told me who you were." "So you could dismiss me with a different kind of insult?" Camille replied, her tone still calm. "So you could remind me that even with a PhD, I was still just the help?" That's when the door swung open and Ethan ran in, his footsteps quick and determined, followed closely by Dr. Kim. "Camille! Camille!" he shouted in Portuguese, then switched to French without pause. "J'apprends une nouvelle chanson," and seamlessly into Spanish. "Puedes enseñar más palabras?" Elizabeth stood frozen. Her son, who hadn't spoken a full sentence in over 2 years, had just shifted fluently between 3 languages in one breath. Dr. Kim approached the desk calmly. "Elizabeth, I need to show you something," he said, placing a tablet on the polished wood. He tapped the screen, and a video began to play. "Camille has been documenting Ethan's progress under my supervision. These were all recorded in the past 3 weeks." In the first clip, Ethan counted confidently to 10 in German. In the second, he recited the Mandarin alphabet. In the third, he sang a children's rhyme in Arabic, smiling. 7 languages, Dr. Kim said quietly. In just under a month. Ethan doesn't just speak. He understands grammar, sentence structure, context. His cognitive profile is far from impaired. It's exceptional. Elizabeth's eyes flicked between the screen, Camille and her son, utterly speechless. "How?" she asked. "How is this even possible?" Camille stood and moved to Ethan's side, kneeling beside him with gentle reassurance. "Because he was never profoundly autistic," she said. "He has selective mutism, brought on by trauma and emotional disconnection. Once he found safety and a form of expression that made sense to his mind, everything inside him began to flow outward. Naturally." Ethan turned toward his mother, and for the first time in 2 years looked directly into her eyes. "Mama," he said in perfect English. "Camille says cheese." Then he smiled and added, "Intelligent." His voice switched smoothly into Italian. "La mia amica mi ha insegnato che posso parlare quando voglio." Elizabeth felt tears gather in her eyes. Her son, whom she had wrapped in silence and medication, now stood before her with more eloquence and clarity than most children his age. "Ethan," she whispered, kneeling down beside him, her voice trembling. "You could always speak." "Yes, Mama," he replied. "But you looked sad when I tried. So I stopped." He glanced at Camille and added softly in French, "Mais Camille m'écoute. Elle comprend." The room fell silent, not a cold silence, but one heavy with emotion and awareness. Elizabeth looked at Camille, at the woman she had dismissed, disregarded, reduced to a task. Camille didn't return the look with triumph, only a deep, quiet sorrow. "I didn't know," Elizabeth murmured. "I truly didn't know." "I know," Camille replied gently, "but now you do. The question is, what will you do with that truth?" Dr. Kim stepped forward and placed a hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "Ethan needs continuity. Pulling Camille away now would be a setback we might never recover from." Elizabeth looked once more at her son, who was now quietly stacking blocks and counting in Japanese, calm and focused. Then she looked at Camille, the woman who had changed everything in her home without making a sound. I need to apologize," Elizabeth said, her voice cracking as she finally let go of the wall she'd built around herself. "And I need to ask you to stay, not as a housekeeper, but as Ethan's teacher, as the person who gave me my son back." Camille offered a quiet smile, not one of triumph, but of quiet peace. The smile of someone who has finally seen a child recognized for exactly who he is. "I'll stay," she said softly, "but on one condition. Ethan isn't a miracle. He isn't a success story. He's just a brilliant little boy who deserves to be loved for who he is, not for what he can do." Elizabeth nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek as the weight of understanding settled into her chest. Ethan walked up to them, slipping his small hands into both of theirs. "Mama, Camille," he said in Portuguese, his voice full of innocence. "Are we a real family now?" And in that moment, 3 lives changed forever. Not with press releases or court battles, but through the quiet revolution of a child who finally found his voice and a mother who finally learned to hear it. 6 months later, the Whitmore estate was unrecognizable. Once cold and silent, the mansion now rang with laughter, conversations in 5 languages and, most importantly, Ethan's melodic voice, echoing through the halls. "Mama, I learned a new word in Swedish today," he called out as he bounded onto the porch where Elizabeth was working on her laptop. "Kärlek. It means love." Elizabeth looked up and smiled, a real, effortless smile, the kind Camille had coaxed from her after months of peeling away her fear. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. And where's Miss Camille?" "She's filming a new video." Ethan grinned, switching to Spanish with ease. "Hoy tenemos muchos estudiantes nuevos." The YouTube channel Learning with Ethan had exploded in just 4 months. Over 2 million subscribers followed Camille's gentle, insightful videos, where she taught multilingual development strategies, using Ethan's journey as proof that language is connection, not limitation. Donations poured in. Educational partnerships were signed. Within weeks, they'd raised over $500,000 for the foundation Elizabeth had launched in Ethan's name, supporting neurodivergent children across the country. But the channel was only the beginning. Harvard, Stanford, and Columbia were now in a bidding war to bring Camille on as a tenured professor. 3 major publishers competed for the rights to her book, The Language of the Heart: How Multilingualism Transforms Special Children, which had become a bestseller before it was even released. Dr. Dawson, Elizabeth said that afternoon, using the title she now pronounced with pride and reverence. The foundation received 5 more requests this week, public schools asking to implement your method. Camille, dressed in a soft blazer Elizabeth had insisted on gifting her, smiled while organizing flashcards and printed lesson plans. 15 schools in 6 months, she murmured. I never imagined we'd reach this far. And Sandra? Elizabeth asked, referring to the former housekeeper who had been dismissed after trying to sabotage Camille's work by spreading vicious rumors among the staff. I heard she's still job hunting, Camille said softly, no trace of spite in her voice. Apparently, high society families don't want to hire someone known for airing gossip about their employers online. Elizabeth gave a faint smile. Karma's never in a rush. Just then, Dr. Kim stepped onto the porch, carrying a bulky briefcase and an expression of barely contained excitement. Ladies, he said, I have phenomenal news. Your paper was accepted by Nature Neuroscience. And that's not all. The American Pediatric Association wants you to present your method at their national conference. Elizabeth let out a breath as she glanced at the garden. Ethan was crouched by the hedges, cheerfully chatting with the gardener in fluent German. 6 months ago, she had resigned herself to the idea that her son might never speak. Now, he was more articulate than most children his age. You know what amazes me the most? Elizabeth said, turning to Camille. It's not just the languages or the recognition. It's the light in his eyes. Camille nodded gently. Children like Ethan don't need to be fixed, Elizabeth. They just need someone willing to understand them. That evening over dinner, Ethan stood up with a nervous grin. Mama? Miss Camille? I wrote something. A thank you letter. Can I read it? The 2 women exchanged surprised glances and nodded. Ethan unfolded the page carefully, then began, his voice strong and sure. Dear Mom and dear Miss Camille, before, I felt like I was stuck inside a glass box. I could see the world, but no one could hear me. Miss Camille didn't break the box. She showed me there never was one. And Mom, thank you for letting her teach me that. I've always been perfect just the way I am. Neither woman could hold back tears. 3 months later, Camille stood on the main stage of the International Special Education Conference, facing a packed auditorium of over 5,000 educators, therapists, and parents from across the globe. Beside her stood 8-year-old Ethan, calm and confident, holding the microphone. My name is Ethan Whitmore, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. A year ago, doctors said I might never speak. Today, I speak 9 languages, because one woman believed I had a voice from the very beginning. She just taught me how to use it. The crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. As Camille smiled and placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, Elizabeth watched from the front row. Looking around, she saw tears in the eyes of hundreds of professionals, people who had spent their lives searching for a moment like this. Here stood living proof that labeling a child as limited is often the most damaging limitation we place upon them. When Camille Dawson stepped up to the microphone, her voice was steady and unwavering. 1 year ago, she began, I was invisible in this society. Today, I stand here not because I changed, but because someone finally chose to see me. The same is true for Ethan. He always had this brilliance inside him. I simply created the space where it felt safe enough to emerge. After the lecture, a journalist approached Dr. Dawson and asked, When did you realize Ethan was special? Camille smiled, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. The first time he looked me in the eyes, she replied. All children are special. Some just need a different language to express their magic. Today, 2 years later, the Ethan and Camille Foundation has changed the lives of over 10,000 neurodivergent children across the country. Elizabeth Whitmore has become a leading voice in the movement for inclusive education. And Camille? Camille has shown the world that the most powerful response to prejudice isn't anger or retaliation. It's building something so impactful, so undeniably beautiful, that those who once dismissed you are left with no choice but to acknowledge your worth. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that greatness doesn't wear uniforms, live in bank accounts, or speak with privilege, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove a person's value is not found in the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the title on their name, but in the lives they uplift simply by believing.